Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anthony Leong. Welcome to Anthology, where I share my experience of God with you. Today's chapter is called Dark Claw. Dark Claw is based on an experience I had ministering to a homeless woman. About 45 minutes into this time of ministry, another minister from a conference that I had just left approached, interrupted, and completely destroyed this moment of help and healing for this homeless woman. I became infuriated at the result, and I didn't fully understand what was going on at the time. Now, well, they say hindsight is 2020, and so we are going to discover and dive into those details together. So without further ado, let's begin. There was a conference that I went to with a few friends of mine that was hosted in the Twin Cities area. This was a pretty well-known conference and it's still hosted to this day. Although I don't know if it's primarily happening in the Twin Cities, but it is an event that hosts a conference, multi-day conference, and they go from city to city throughout the United States. And a huge focus of this conference is evangelism. You know, outreach towards people who have not heard of Jesus or maybe have heard of Jesus. And either way, it is spreading the gospel. It's preaching, evangelizing. Some people call it proselytizing, right? So I was able to make it to one of the days of this conference. And maybe I was at a couple, but I remember this specific day in particular. So the conference, is a morning session, and then in the afternoon, what they do is they pray for everybody and they send people out into the streets in the local region to go and minister, see if they can find people to minister to and preach the gospel to. So I take this very seriously, right? And the conference is about preaching with the power of God and preaching with the heart of the gospel and the heart of Jesus in mind for these people. So I'm on the streets with two friends of mine who joined me at the conference in this particular day. And we're going around the streets and we happened to come across this woman who was homeless. And it's obvious that she was homeless based on her physical appearance, right? Her feet were swollen to the max. She didn't have shoes on, and maybe she did, but they were if she did, they were sandals. In other words, you could see her feet totally swollen and messed up. Her clothing was very tattered, and she just looked like she was going through it, you know? So I approached her and I began to talk with her. And she immediately we had a I think we had lanyards on from this conference, and I think she saw the lanyard and she immediately began to shout profanity and say, I don't have any money to give you. And what I recognized pretty quickly was that this woman had been taken advantage of by ministers in the past. And it was very clear, and I'm pretty sharp, I'm pretty quick when it comes to discerning the root from where people speak. And so she was speaking from this root of trauma that she experienced from people who called themselves Christians and really were trying to get something from her. And sadly, that's a story from a story of a lot of different people. But anyways, so we're talking with her and I'm doing most of the communicating. I've spent a lot of time ministering to homeless people and spending time with people who are overlooked in society. Jesus said if you give to the poor, you lend to the Lord. That's what the Bible says. And Jesus said, if you give a cold cup to one of these little ones, or if you clothe me when I was naked, and the disciples are like, Lord, when did we see you naked? When did we visit you in jail? When did we give you a cold cup of water? And he says, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. And so I take that seriously. So I'm spending time with this homeless woman and we're spending a lot of time. And as we're talking, obviously she has physical needs, right? You can tell her physical needs are there. And we were going to do what we could to help in that regard. But really, I was focused on her soul. I was focused on what was going on the inside of her because this particular woman was very volatile. She was just shooting back and forth in conversation. She was firing out different comments that seemed to be disconnected from the conversation. She was just kind of everywhere. And that's not the case with every person that's homeless at all. So some people are actually really intelligent, like really smart, I'll say, very smart. So as we're beginning to talk, I'm starting to press in deeper and deeper to get to core issues in her heart so that I can minister healing to her heart. And as she's talking, she's like, I don't know where he is. I don't, we're just talk let's say we're just talking about, what's your name? And she'll say something like, I don't know where he is. He was 9. I didn't murder him. I didn't murder him. And I was like, you don't know where he is. He was 9. I didn't murder him. I didn't murder him. I thought that's sounds kind of like a guilty conscience. So I said, "Who are you talking about? Who's he? And who's the 9-year-old boy you're talking about?" She goes, "I haven't seen him. He's my son. I haven't seen him since he was 9. I didn't murder him. I didn't murder him." And I'm going, "Oof, this is highly sensitive." So I press in and I press in and I press in and I start to get down deeper and deeper into this part of her story because obviously this is something that is like weighing on her conscience deeply because I didn't even bring up anything having to do with her child or her guilt or anything. I was just basically talking about who she was and how her day was going, and that's how I started the conversation, and she just jumped right in the deep end. So then I start pressing in a little bit more into this. It seemed like it was a confession, and she talked about how she started getting into drugs and she didn't know where to keep her son and she wanted to keep him off the street, but there was nowhere safe for her to keep him. And then she would just kind of every once in a while say, but I didn't murder him. And you know i I wanted to get deeper into that, but she was kind of gridlocked in that area. I was really trying to break through and pierce through to see if I could actually extract from her what had happened because it's hard to heal something that isn't revealed. If you conceal something and you hide it, it's really hard to heal that area of the heart because oftentimes the heart is, you could call it like it has armor on it. People put armor on their own hearts. And many times that armor is in the form of an experience or a trauma. And in order for that heart, and imagine you're wearing shoes for 30 days straight. You never take them off. Those shoes might get like stuck to your feet. You'll get blisters and sores under your feet. And those sores can't be exposed to sunlight, to air, to breath unless you take those shoes off. But in order to unlace the shoes and take them off, sometimes that shoe almost becomes one with the foot in certain circumstances through bodily fluids, through heat. And so it's painful to take it off. But in order to really heal that foot, you have to take off that armor. And so oftentimes when people have these strongholds that are guarding their hearts, they think they're guarding their hearts, but really the heart is dying on the inside because it's not getting any sunlight. It's growing dark, it's growing dim, and that stronghold has to be broken and let go of in order for the heart to breathe. So I recognized though that she wasn't going to give this up because I really pressed on this issue because I really wanted to see, did you murder your son? And I'm not a cop. I'm not an informant. Um, so she, I think she was just really skeptical about going there because it potentially held some legal ramifications, if you know what I mean. So we started going down a different area, and she kept on saying to me, "I don't have any money. I don't have any money to give you. Like I'm dirty. You don't want like," as if basically she thought I was either gonna take money from her or I was going to attempt to, like, physically take advantage of her. That's like a polished way to say it. Um, and so I had to convince her that I wasn't there to take anything from her. In fact, I had to convince her that I was there to give to her, that I wanted to give her love, that I wanted to give her time, that I wanted to give her attention, that I wanted to help her. And after about 30 minutes of time with her, she started to recognize, "Oh, yeah, like, these guys aren't here for anything else other than to help me," and she was mind blown. She was mind blown that I took that much. It's only 30 minutes, but she was mind blown that I took that much time to spend with her. Uh, and so she started to open up. She started to talk about her name. She started to talk about her past. She started to talk about her experience with the church. She started to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. And as she did that, her eyes started getting illumined. Her eyes started getting lighter and lighter. She had really dark circles and looked really worn down, but she started to look like she was coming alive, and life was entering into her. Living water, the Bible would call it. She was drinking living water and she was getting refreshed. And she was just getting to the point at this time where she was starting to open up. And I actually thought she might start opening up about this deeper thing, because I moved on from it and started focusing over here. And as she was opening up here, I felt like in my heart that she was going to be able to open up about this very, very crucial, sensitive topic about her son, because she understood that I was really trying to drive that point home. I wanted to speak with her about that specific thing because I could tell that was like a source of a fountain of pain that was on the inside of her. So we're just getting there. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, you guys love me. You love me. You care about me." And she was getting this revelation. And I'm like, "We do, we do." And she's like, "Well, what God do you believe in? And then so we're starting to get somewhere. And right on the edge, when I'm like, "Oh, we're making traction. Like we've been sowing seeds and now we're making traction." This guy from the conference walks up, and I could tell that he was, either a volunteer or on staff at the conference, because he had a different lanyard than I did. And he comes up and he he interjects, like, super rude, just breaks into the conversation. He goes, "Hey," and I look up at him and I go and see, I'll tell you the story and then I'll tell you what I would have done differently, what I have done differently since. He comes in, he goes, "Hey," and I look up at him and, I go, "What's up, man?" And he gains the attention of this woman. She takes her eyes off me and looks at him. And all of a sudden, he gets down on his knees. And when he does, I feel in the spirit a dark claw coming over the meeting, coming over the group, this dark claw. And I was like, "Whoa, what is this?" And all of a sudden, he asks her, he like assumes authority in this time of ministry. Now, mind you, he's on staff or a volunteer at the conference, so I'm respecting him as somebody because I have conference gear on, so he knows I'm part of the conference, but I know that he's part of the staff, so I'm like, okay, maybe I'm deferring some of this time to you because this is your gig, and that's what I was thinking, but I shouldn't have done that. Okay, because of what ends up happening. So he bends down on his knees and he says in this very pious voice, he says, "Do you have any pain in your body? Do you have any pain in your body?" And I'm like, "Duh. Look at her feet. Look at her body. Obviously, she has pain in her body, bro." I'm like, "This is obvious. What are you doing?" And she goes, "Yeah, my feet hurt." And he says, "All right, I'm going to pray for your feet to be healed." And he's straining his voice so he sounds so like, oh, he cares so much, and oh, he can just feel the love. And you know when people have to accentuate their voices in an abnormal fashion to put on a cloak of humility or holiness, that's a sign that you have false humility and carnality. All right. You don't have to do that to appear a certain way. So, and that's not the first time I've seen somebody do that. People do that pretty frequently. Preachers do that. Uh, a lot of people do that. Theatrics, we would call that. Showmanship. Not good. So he prays for her feet and all these things. And then he gets up and he basically just leaves. And I'm like, what just happened? What just happened? And then I sat back down next to this lady and I try to re-engage with the conversation. And she basically now acts as though she doesn't even know me. It's this weird thing that happened where the disconnect was so big and what had happened was so cheap and it lacked power. It was a show. What this guy just did, it was a show. There was no power in it. There was no glory. There was no manifestation of God's presence. She was thoroughly unimpressed. So her heart just crawled back inside and she locked it up. And I tried to re-engage with her and she was gone. And I heard the Lord speak to me and he said, "She will receive nothing more from me today." And I thought that he was kind of declaring that over her at first, but then I recognized he was saying to me, she closed her heart and now she's not going to receive anything else from me. And he was very stern about this. God was very stern. And she got up and walked away. And I was filled with anger. I was filled with indignation for what just happened. And you know, I don't mean to mock this young guy. I think he had good intentions. I don't mean to belittle what he was doing. I think, like I said, he had good intentions, but he was moved by something that was unholy. And if I did just mock him there, I'm sorry for doing that. Lord, I'm sorry for doing that. That was not proper. I was just so angry and talking about this again, this anger and I felt kind of twofold. I felt angry that I let it happen, and then I felt the anger of God, which is what I heard when he said, "She will receive nothing more from me today." There was this anger, not at her, but at the situation, like a righteous anger. And so thinking about this and talking about it again brings up that anger and you know, uh, man's man's wrath produces not the righteousness of God. So I'm angry and I walk away and my two friends are kind of walking with me and they don't really know what just happened, but I'm furious because I saw the in the spirit this dark claw and I recognized the moment of ministry broke and we were getting somewhere and I'm just angry. I was so angry. And what I should have done was stop this guy. Should have stopped him right away. He has no business. First of all, there was no, you know, he had no right to interrupt. He could have stood there, but he had no right to interrupt like that and just take the moment of ministry. Number 1. Number 2, God was giving me access to this woman and I had built something with her personally for like 30 minutes. So I should have just stonewalled that guy because we were getting somewhere. But I don't totally blame this guy either because I think he was trained improperly through the ministry who was hosting these conferences to focus more thoroughly on the physical person rather than the soul and the spirit of a person. Yes, if somebody sees a miracle in their body, they're probably going to be open to hear where that power came from. And that's where you can introduce them to the God of the miraculous, Jesus. But if you don't see that kind of healing, you don't see that kind of power, and you don't even believe it, you're just doing it for, religious dogmatic purposes. It's a show, and it turns people off because they're confused. They're like, "Well, he prayed for me, but it didn't happen, but he thought it happened, but I know it didn't happen, so but he's the minister, like, what's going on here?" It creates confusion. So I think he was just trained wrong, but he had good intentions. Um, so I walked away and I knew that dark claw was the hand of the enemy, and that's what I gathered. It was there to steal. You know, Sticky Fingers, I'm going to be releasing a chapter soon called Sticky Fingers about stealing, right? That's what you basically say. Someone has sticky fingers, that means they're a thief. The enemy's hand was there to steal this moment. And I should have just rebuked the man and continued on, but I didn't. But God, in his sovereignty and his redemption, allowed me to reconnect with this guy years later. And I ended up giving him a warning, and that warning basically sealed this kind of total testimony. And this is what happened. So years later, I was working with a food shelf, a food bank. Not working with them, but I was helping them out, volunteering and helping. And there was some exchange of I was helping him, he was helping me. But this one day, and he had a route, so he would take this truck and he would go and he would get food from all these different grocery stores, and then he would take that food and he would either put it in a freezer and then give it to people who had need, or he would take the food and bring it to churches and whatnot and unload the pallets, and they would disperse it to the people in their community. Cool ministry. One day, he couldn't run his route, so he asked me to drive the truck. Now, I had never driven this truck, I'd never driven the route. It was, a huge box truck, kind of like a UPS truck. So I drove it, and I drove it downtown in Minnesota, and I drove it to this ministry. And while I was pulling up to this ministry, I was getting out of the truck, and lo and behold, I saw this guy because he had a very distinct, um facial complexion and hair and everything like that. Very distinct, and I recognized him immediately. So, I was like, "Oh my gosh." So I go into the truck and I'm praying and I'm getting all of these items out of the truck for this church. And I'm bringing them into the church, and the Lord says to me, he says, "You need to go and give him a warning." And I'm like, "For what? Like, what's the warning about?" And he says, "When you go and begin to speak to him, I'll give the warning to you and you'll deliver it to him. Because I don't want you to," and this is what happens with me and the Lord. At least it did when I was younger in the faith. That God would give me, he'd say, I want you to go and rebuke this person. I want you to go and give this person a warning. I want you to go and prophesy to this person. And oftentimes I wouldn't even get the prophecy until I was speaking with them. And sometimes I get 2 words and I'm like, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "When you begin to speak to them, the words will form in you." And this was an exercise of faith. This is how I learned to trust God, to simply step in faith, and once I stepped, things would begin to flow. And that's the way it works. That's the way it works across the board. You look at Moses, once Moses lifted his hand to the sea, the Red Sea, then it parted. So God leads you, then he commands you to do something, and then you do it, and then you see things unfold. And that's faith. So I said, "All right." So I'm gonna go. I go up to him and I introduce myself, and I say, "Hey, I met you years ago back at this conference." And he goes, "Oh yeah, I love the conference and I love the ministry and everything." And I said, "Yeah, you know, when you were there, the way I met you was actually on the street." And I began to tell him the story that I just told you, about what I was in the middle of and what he interrupted and what happened and how I saw I was actually, charged in an unclean power was behind that. And it was actually a moment of not ministry, but anti ministry. And he starts to get a little bit kind of, like, who are you? And like, what are you saying? And I said, look, God says this. He says, on that day, there will be many people who say, Lord, Lord, did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not heal the sick in your name? Did we not perform mighty exploits in your name? And God will say to those people, be gone from me, you workers of lawlessness. I never knew you. and they'll be sent into outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I began to quote this scripture out of Matthew chapter 7 to him, and I basically ended up saying, look, you can seek to do all these ministry things, but if you seek to do all these works and you are disconnected from God, you'll deceive yourself into believing that you're walking with God and doing the works of the ministry, but God will see you as a heathen. He'll see you as um, a worker of lawlessness, one who is unsubmitted to God Himself, and one who's doing sin, who's working iniquity. And the guy goes, bro, he goes, that's so crazy. I'm about to go teach a Bible study right now, and I'm teaching on Matthew 7. And I stop him and I go, look, therefore, the fact that I'm giving you a prophecy from Matthew chapter 7 when you are going to preach on Matthew chapter 7 today is confirmation, but it's confirmation to you. This is a warning to you. I was sent here today for you. And I'm warning you, if you do not submit and connect with God and follow God, instead of just finding out all of these principles of the power of God and going to use those according to your own will, if you don't come into alignment and submission to the Holy Spirit, you're going to fall into self deception. And the warning is if you go down that path, you will go down into the pathway of those who are named in Matthew chapter 7, who do the works of God and are disconnected from God Himself. And I said, so as you preach this message, if you decide to, understand that it's a message for you. And God is showing mercy to you today. Years later, after our first experience, He's been patient with you for years. But me telling you this is a sign that you've been doing this for years. And God has been patient with you, but there's a threshold that you're coming up to, and you need to change. And you need to submit to God. And God is so merciful to you. Look, He sent me to you. But this is serious. And then he's like, all right, man, thank you so much, bro. And, he went his way. And that concluded our conversation. So I finished unloading all the pastries and all the different items of food, and I drove back. And that was the only time I ever drove the truck. It was to go and give this man a warning because I didn't want the dark claw that stole a moment of ministry from me and from that woman to be a dark claw that stole this man's soul from the presence of God. And the thing that made me angry on our first encounter was the thing that I was counteracting in our second encounter. I was trying to rebuke that dark claw off of his life. And I go back to the beginning of the video. I actually don't think I was mocking him. I think I was just impersonating him. That's how he talked. And he did say, bro, 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 bro. And that's all he said. Bro. Hippie like. And I hope he's doing well. I hope he heeded that warning. I hope he listened. And I hope he got free from that dark claw. So, this is an experience of learning, anger, frustration, potential redemption, and the power of walking with God, which is what I was doing, which was going out of my way. I didn't have to take this truck downtown this day, but I said, yeah, I'll go down. It interrupted what I was doing. I actually remember distinctly I didn't want to do it, but I was there to serve. And so I believe through my service and help and the leadership of the Lord, followed by going and simply being obedient to go and speak with this man, I accomplished the assignment that I was sent for that day. So, a little lesson. Sometimes the inconveniences are the will of God. Just the way it is. Sometimes the convenience is God's will. So, hopefully you learned. Hopefully this blessed you. Thank you so much for watching today. If you receive benefit from this and you would like more from me, visit the link in my bio. You'll be taken to anthonyjamesleong.com where you'll find support options as well as ways to become a patron. Patrons gain access to my dream journal, Knock Tiffany, which is available only on my website. There, I share dreams I've had, break them down, and explain how I arrive at their interpretations. It serves as a object lesson for people to learn how to properly interpret dreams, as well as there being dreams posted there that are relevant for the modern moment that we're living in. They are prophetic dreams. So if that's something that interests you, please visit the link in my bio. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so much for watching today. I'm Anthony Leong. This is Anthology. And until the next chapter, Godspeed.